she collapsed. Then the nurse collapsed, and then the doctor passed out, all from treating one patient. And it only got weirder from there. You and I are about to walk through 6 of the strangest, most unbelievable, yet 100% real stories that I've come across so far. These are not urban legends. These are documented, verified, and still completely unexplainable. From 2 presidents linked by impossible symmetry, to a man who accidentally caught 2 falling babies out of a window a year apart. These are stories that make you pause and ask, is this all just chance? Or is something bigger going on? Welcome to the No Way Files, and I hope you're ready, because it gets weird fast. It started with a routine emergency call. A woman, unresponsive and struggling to breathe, was rushed to the hospital. Nurses prepped the room, doctors got into position. Standard procedure. A typical night in the ER. But within minutes of her arrival, people started collapsing. Nurses fainted, a doctor dropped to her knees, and one staff member had to be dragged out by her ankles. And in the center of it all, a woman whose body seemed to be emitting something. Something that no one could explain. Something that turned a busy ER into a disaster zone. And to this day, no one can fully agree on how. This is the story of Gloria Ramirez, the woman who may have become toxic to the touch. It was the night of February 19th, 1994 in Riverside, California. Paramedics rushed 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez into the emergency room at Riverside General Hospital. She was conscious but disoriented. Her heart was racing. She was in the middle of a severe case of late-stage cervical cancer, and she was struggling to breathe. The attending ER team immediately began treating her. Oxygen, IV fluids, and medications to slow her heartbeat. Standard emergency protocol. But right away, something was off. As the medical team worked on her, multiple staff noticed a strange, oily sheen covering her skin. It had an odd texture. It was almost greasy. And then came the smell. The nurses described it as garlicky, fruity odor coming from Gloria's mouth. Others said it was more like ammonia. One nurse leaned in to draw blood, and that's when things took a turn. Inside of the syringe, she saw unusual particles floating in the blood. Small, white crystals. Moments later, she fainted. It wasn't just one nurse. Within minutes, 6 medical professionals collapsed inside the trauma bay. One nurse even began convulsing. A respiratory therapist became paralyzed. Another staff member couldn't breathe and had to be intubated. A total of 23 hospital workers experienced symptoms ranging from nausea and dizziness to temporary paralysis and blackouts. 5 of them required hospitalization. The hospital declared an internal emergency. The ER was evacuated. Staff began working outside in the parking lot, all while Gloria Ramirez, the patient at the center of it all, lay dying. Miss Ramirez was pronounced dead at 8:50 p.m., just 45 minutes after she arrived. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it was only just beginning. Riverside General was now under pressure from the media, from law enforcement, and from its own terrified staff to explain what had just happened. Why had treating a dying woman led to a mass chemical exposure? What kind of compound was found in her blood? And was this a biological event or something much stranger? The first official explanation came quickly. Mass psychogenic illness, better known as mass hysteria. Experts from California's Department of Health suggested that stress and fear may have triggered a chain reaction of symptoms in the staff. One nurse collapses, others panic, and the symptoms become psychosomatic, real but mental in origin. But hospital workers were furious. These weren't untrained civilians. They were professionals, doctors, nurses, ER veterans. Some had physical symptoms that could not be faked, including liver damage and chemical burns in their nasal passages. So if it wasn't all in their heads, then what was it? The second, more scientific theory was a bit more compelling and more disturbing. Toxicologists proposed that Gloria Ramirez had been self-medicating her cancer pain using DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide. It's an industrial solvent available over the counter in some places in the 1990s. It had been used as a pain reliever and anti-inflammatory, despite not being FDA approved for internal use. When applied to the skin, it can leave garlic-like odor, just what the staff had reported. But here's where it gets wild. Under certain conditions, especially in the presence of oxygen and under high temperatures used during medical defibrillation, DMSO can undergo chemical transformation. It can convert into dimethyl sulfate, a highly toxic gas phase poison capable of damaging cells, nerves, and organs on contact. If that transformation occurred in Gloria's bloodstream, it would explain the white crystals in her blood, the collapse of multiple staff, and the chemical burns and liver damage in survivors. However, there's still a problem here. The conversion from DMSO to dimethyl sulfate isn't just rare. It requires very specific lab conditions, including high energy input, not something that should have happened in a hospital trauma bay. So, did it? Or was something else at play here? To this day, no one fully agrees on the cause. The Riverside Coroner's Office ruled that Gloria Ramirez died of kidney failure due to her cancer and offered no definitive explanation for the mass poisoning. The DMSO theory remains the most accepted, but still not proven. And the hospital staff? Many still believe that something else was going on. Some suspect a chemical used in sterilization or cleaning had reacted unpredictably with something in Ramirez's body. Others quietly whisper about an unreported experimental treatment or even a cover-up. What we're left with is a case that sounds like science fiction, but is 100% real. It's been studied in toxicology textbooks, it's been recreated in chemical labs, and this incident is still used as a case study for what happens when science, stress, and something unexplainable collide. Miss Ramirez walked into the hospital at 8 p.m., and by 8:50, she was dead. And by 9, her name was already becoming legend. A woman whose final moments triggered a chain reaction that left a team of trained professionals helpless, or maybe haunted. We may never know what really happened in Room 1 of Riverside General that night, but one thing is certainly clear. She didn't just leave behind a medical file. She left behind a mystery. Sometimes a moment feels so unnatural it doesn't even seem human. But other times, it feels designed, like someone's playing with symmetry. Let's move from the chaos of one hospital room to the calm of a candlelit dinner that became something far more disturbing. Imagine this. It's a sultry July night in Italy, 1900. King Umberto I ducks into a humble trattoria outside of Monza for a quick bite. Across the room stands the owner. Same coal-black mustache, same imperial jawline, and when the royal entourage stammers out a greeting, they discover he even shares the exact same name as the king, and far too many more coincidences that are way too close for comfort. Two perfect doubles, one royal crown, and a destiny hurtling toward the gunshots that'll echo before sunrise. Stay right here, because what happens after these mirrored lives collide reads less like a dusty history article and more like a cosmic practical joke with a deadly punchline. It was July 28, 1900, in the quiet city of Monza, a northern town not far from Milan. Italy's reigning monarch, King Umberto I, had traveled there for a public ceremony. That evening, the king and his entourage stopped for dinner at a local restaurant. The food was excellent, the service was sharp, but what really made the night unforgettable wasn't on the menu. It was the owner. The moment that King Umberto saw the man, he reportedly froze. Standing before him was someone who looked exactly like him, and not just similar, but identical. Same face, same posture, same mustache, same height and build. And when the king asked his name, the answer made the whole room go quiet. "Umberto," the owner said. Naturally, the two began talking. What started as a novelty quickly unraveled into something much, much weirder. The owner of the restaurant was born on March 14th, 1844, the exact same day as King Umberto. He was born in Turin, the same city as the king. They had both married women named Margherita, with the same spelling and everything. Now here's where it gets impossible. The restaurant had opened on the very day that King Umberto had been crowned King of Italy, on January 9th, 1878. Let's recap. Same face, same name, same birthday, same birthplace. Their wives are named the same thing, and they have the same coronation date as business opening. What is this? A glitch in the Matrix? A cosmic twin? A spiritual double? The king, reportedly unnerved but amused, told the man that they'd talk again soon. The two parted ways for the evening, but they would never meet again. The very next day, July 29th, 1900, King Umberto was preparing to present awards at a public athletic competition in Monza. The crowds were loud, the sun was hot, and security was tight. At exactly 10:30 p.m., as the king stood to address the audience, an anarchist named Gaetano Bresci emerged from the crowd and shot the king 4 times at close range. The king died shortly after. Word of the assassination spread instantly, but as the palace was reeling, another death was being reported. Mere hours earlier, the restaurant owner, Umberto's twin, had been killed in a gun accident that same day. 2 men, same everything, dead on the same day. Let's break this down. Could this be fabricated? Just some apocryphal tale passed down through whispers and wine? Actually, no. This story was recorded by Italian historians and widely reported across Europe. Newspapers of the area documented the uncanny encounter, and several biographies of King Umberto I mentioned the restaurant incident specifically. It's since appeared in the Big Book of Amazing Facts, Chronicles of the Unexplained, The World's Greatest Coincidences, and in writings by Carl Jung under the study of synchronicity. So, what are we left with here? A doppelganger? A literal twin separated at birth, maybe? A statistical anomaly so rare that it has no known match. Some theorists have suggested that the restaurant owner may have been an illegitimate relative of the royal family, a possibility that was never confirmed and conveniently buried after both men's deaths. Others believe that the event is the closest real-world example of bilocation, which is the idea that the same soul can exist in two places at once. Whatever the explanation is, it happened, and no one's ever explained how. After the assassination, King Umberto I was succeeded by his son, Victor Emmanuel III, who would go on to lead Italy through both world wars. The restaurant in Monza was eventually closed, and the name of the mysterious owner, this identical Umberto, was never recorded again. But the story has lived on for over a century, cited again and again by writers, philosophers, psychologists, and believers in the unexplained. It remains one of the most symmetrical and eerie documented coincidences in modern history. A moment where identity and fate and reality blurred and never quite unblurred. So what do we do with a story like this? Do we chalk it up to coincidence? Do we assume that there's some record-keeping error that nobody caught? Or do we admit that maybe the world has a way of playing with mirrors that we don't understand? Two Umbertos, one crown, one trigger, and one eerie addition to the No Way files. Two men, same name, same face, same fate. That was eerie enough. But what happens when history doesn't just repeat, it mirrors itself down to the letters and the dates? If you think you've heard of the Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences before, you haven't heard all of it. You might already be aware of what's called the Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences. Some of the main points are Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846, Kennedy elected in 1946, 100 years later. Lincoln elected president in 1860 and Kennedy president in 1960, another 100-year gap. Both men were assassinated on a Friday, shot in the head in the presence of their wives. Both of them were succeeded by a man named Johnson, one Andrew Johnson, born 1808, and one Lyndon B. Johnson, born 1908, another 100-year gap. What if I told you that's just the tip of the iceberg, though? That buried inside the lives, deaths, and legacies of these two American presidents, separated by a whole century, is a web of symmetry so precise that some people still can't believe it's real. But it is. And if you think it's all just a coincidence, then you haven't seen how deep it actually goes. Those surface-level coincidences I just listed already feel incredibly uncanny. But the details, the finer threads of the symmetry, are what really make the Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences truly impossible to ignore. Let's look at their inner circles. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. And both of these secretaries, according to White House lore, warned their presidents not to go to the locations where they would later be shot. Lincoln was urged not to attend Ford's Theater. Kennedy was warned not to travel to Dallas. Now, here's where it gets even weirder. I know. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Ford Lincoln, a car made by the Ford Motor Company named after the other president. So we have two presidents, one Ford, and both of them were shot there. That's symbolic recursion. It's a pattern that references itself, and it's not the only one. Let's talk about the men who pulled the triggers. John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln in 1865. Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated John F. Kennedy, allegedly, in 1963. That's a 98-year difference. I was hoping for another century gap there, but we got close. But there is something creepy in another part of that math. John Wilkes Booth contains 15 letters. Lee Harvey Oswald also contains 15 letters, and both of these assassins are known by 3 names, which is common in legal records, but it turns out that both of them also were born ending in years 39. Booth, 1839, and Oswald, 1939. They were both Southern extremists with deeply political motives. And both of them were killed before their trials, both shot by federal agents. I should also provide a bit more detail on the way that they were assassinated, but I won't get too gory, I promise. Both of these presidents were shot in the back of the head on a Friday while sitting next to their wives. Lincoln's assassin shot him in a theater and fled to a warehouse. Kennedy's assassin shot him from a warehouse and then fled to a theater. That sounds so made up, but it's not. Booth ran from Ford's Theater and was eventually cornered in a barn on a tobacco farm used as a Confederate storage facility, a converted warehouse. And Oswald? Well, he shot Kennedy from the Texas School Block Depository, a warehouse, then fled to the Texas Theater where he was arrested. Now, I don't think anyone's suggesting that these guys coordinated across a century's time, but what do you think of that kind of symmetry? Is this all just a game of numbers and selective memory, though? Some skeptics will say yes, and it's true that pattern seeking is hardwired into the human brain. Psychologists call it apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections and meaning between unrelated things. But still, 100-year gaps, the name reversals, the repeated numbers, the matching timelines, the identical methods, and the mirrored surroundings. You could call it a statistical fluke, sure, but you could also say this looks like a giant cosmic copy and paste. And here's an additional thing to chew on. Lincoln gave a speech about civil rights and unity just days before his death. Kennedy? Same thing. His civil rights address was delivered just 5 months before he was shot. We have 2 presidents, both with progressive voices, both silenced, in ways that make you wonder if history has some sort of loop function. So, what do we do with all of this? Maybe it's just numbers. Maybe it's psychology. Maybe we want patterns so badly that we'll bend reality just to find them. Or maybe some events are meant to echo. Maybe history has an algorithm. Maybe some people, some names, are never quite really done with the world. Lincoln, Kennedy. Separated by a century, but connected by one pattern, bound by something that we still don't understand. When patterns echo across time, we wonder if history has a memory. But what if the past doesn't echo, but actually follows somebody. Our next story doesn't just involve history. It happened in the living room of a man who tried everything to escape it. Some people go looking for history. Others try to get as far away from it as possible. But what happens when history comes looking for you? In the case of one man, a Virginia farmer named Wilmer McLean, history didn't just come knocking. It broke down his front door, and then, when he tried to run from it, it found him again. And this time, it didn't just visit. It ended there. This is the story of the American Civil War, a cannonball, a parlor, and a man who accidentally bookended one of the most violent conflicts in all of U.S. history, simply by trying to mind his own business. The year is 1861. The United States is fractured. After decades of political tension, slavery, and disputes over federal power, 11 southern states have broken away from the Union to form the Confederate States of America. On July 21st of that same year, 1861, just 3 months after the attack on Fort Sumter, the North and the South meet at a small Virginia town called Manassas for the first major land battle of the war, the First Battle of Bull Run. Right near the battlefield is a peaceful farm owned by a man named Wilmer McLean. He's a retired major in the Virginia militia, but now spends his days growing sugar and raising a family. He's not a soldier anymore, and he wants nothing to do with this war. But war doesn't ask. During the battle, a Union cannonball crashes into McLean's house, smashing through his kitchen and destroying part of the sugar mill. His house had been requisitioned by Confederate General Beauregard to serve as a temporary headquarters, which made it a target. McLean's home had become part of the war. After the First Battle of Bull Run, McLean made a decision. The war wasn't going to stop, but maybe he could get away from it. So, in 1863, he packed up his family and he moved 120 miles south to a quiet town in rural Virginia called Appomattox Courthouse. It was small, out of the way, and unimportant to either side. Or so it seemed. He bought a home, he rebuilt his life, and resumed farming. And for a while, it worked. McLean faded into the background of the war, just another farmer trying to survive the chaos. But history, as it turns out, has a long memory. Fast forward 4 years to April of 1865. The Confederate Army is on its last legs. Union General Ulysses S. Grant has chased General Robert E. Lee across Virginia, and Lee's army is exhausted, outnumbered, and out of supplies. On April 9th of 1865, Lee agrees to surrender, and he chooses a neutral location for the surrender ceremony. A modest home in Appomattox Courthouse, a home that belongs to Wilmer McLean. The man who tried to escape the war now finds it ending in his living room. The formal surrender between Lee and Grant took place in McLean's parlor. Both generals arrived with their aides and negotiated the terms in person. It was one of the most significant moments in American history, the symbolic end of the Civil War, and it happened in the private home of a man who wanted nothing to do with any of it. And here's the kicker. After the meeting ended, Union officers began asking to take souvenirs. Some reportedly paid McLean, others simply helped themselves. They took the chairs, the table, even the very desk where the surrender was signed. They stripped the room bare, all in the name of owning a piece of history. McLean later wrote, "The war began in my front yard and ended in my front parlor. It's one of the most poetic and eerie lines ever spoken by a man who became history's background character. Let's stop and look at the shape of this story. Mr. McLean never fought in the Civil War. He was not a general or a politician. He wasn't even a soldier at that point. He was just a man trying to live. But somehow, the war found him at the very beginning, and it found him again at the very end. It starts in his kitchen, and it ends in his parlor. From a cannonball to a surrender. I don't think you could script it any better if you tried. After the war, McLean struggled financially. He moved his family to Alexandria, Virginia, and tried to collect payment for his damaged and looted home. But the Confederate government no longer existed, and the Union had little interest in paying him for what the soldiers had taken. He later worked as a federal tax collector, quietly living out his days away from the spotlight. He died in 1882, mostly unknown outside historical circles. He had no medals, no monuments were erected in his name. He just had one incredible story. Most of us live our lives trying to make a mark. We strive to be at the center of history, but Wilmer McLean did the exact opposite. He wanted to stay out of it. He tried to run from the chaos, but still, it found him. Some stories sound scripted, but this one is documented, verified, and preserved in Civil War archives across the country. Maybe history has a sense of irony. Maybe fate likes a good punchline. Or maybe some lives are just magnets for moments that define everything. The Civil War may have began in his front yard and ended in his front parlor, but sometimes history's patterns don't explode. Sometimes they whisper. A dessert, a stranger, and a 27-year-long loop that nobody can explain. Have you ever had a moment so strange, so wildly coincidental that it made you stop and wonder, what are the odds? Maybe you bumped into a friend in a city that neither of you live in. Maybe a random thought popped into your head and then it immediately took place in front of you. Well, what if you encountered the same stranger in 3 completely unrelated moments stretched across 27 years? Where every incident has one weird thing in common. That's exactly what happened to a 19th century poet named Emile Deschamps. And the story, known today as the Plum Pudding Paradox, is one of the strangest, most unnerving coincidences ever recorded. The year is 1805. France is in the midst of political upheaval. Napoleon is rising. The streets of Paris are alive with debate, scandal, and revolution. And somewhere in the middle of it all is a young, wide-eyed poet named Emile Deschamps. Now, Deschamps was only 15 years old at the time. His life was quiet, routine, until the day he was introduced to something utterly foreign to him. A dish that he'd never tasted before. Plum pudding. Now, to the British, plum pudding was a holiday staple, but to the French, it was weird. Dense, spiced, sweet, very strange. But what really made the moment stick in Deschamps' memory wasn't the pudding itself. It was the man who introduced it to him. A stranger, older, polite, very not French. His name was Monsieur de Fontgibu. He was, as Deschamps later described him, a gentleman of foreign manner and impeccable timing. They shared the dessert, they exchanged pleasantries, and that was it. Just one brief, odd memory, a dessert and a stranger. For most people, that would be the end. But for Emile Deschamps, it was only the beginning. Fast forward with me 10 years. It's 1815. Napoleon has now fallen. France is reshuffling itself again. And Deschamps, now in his mid-20s, is a rising figure in Parisian literary circles. One day, he walks into a restaurant, a quiet, unremarkable place. He opens the menu, and there he sees plum pudding. He remembers the strange man from a decade ago and the foreign dessert that he was introduced to, and he decides, on a whim, to order it again. Maybe out of nostalgia, maybe curiosity. The waiter shakes his head. "I'm sorry," he says, "we just served the last one." Emile asks, "Well, who was it served to?" None other than Monsieur de Fontgibu. Same man, same dessert, same random collision of lives just 10 years later. Deschamps doesn't approach him this time. He's too stunned. The moment that he's currently sitting in is just too bizarre. What could he even say? For most people, a coincidence like that would live in your head forever. But Deschamps? His story wasn't over yet. Let's fast forward a little more. 1832. Emile Deschamps is almost 42 years old. He's a respected poet, thinker, and romantic. He's attending a private dinner party in Paris, one of those high society affairs where wine flows, conversation sparks, and every course is planned with precision. The final course of the evening is about to be served. And guess what's on the menu? Plum pudding. By this point, Deschamps has told his friends about the other two encounters, so when he sees the pudding, he laughs, and he tells the table, all that's missing is that Monsieur de Fontgibu. Everyone laughs. Good joke. It's a weird little story, but that's all. Until there's a knock at the door. The host excuses himself and returns with a look of total confusion. A man has wandered in, elderly, confused. He thought this house was hosting another dinner somewhere else entirely. He seems lost and apologetic. Can you guess who it is? Monsieur de Fontgibu. At this point, you're probably wondering, how? How could the same two men, who weren't friends, nor family, or even true acquaintances, end up in the same room eating the same rare dessert 3 times over nearly 3 decades? And why does that final encounter feel like something out of a movie script? Deschamps himself never tried to explain it. He simply recorded the events and left them for the world to wonder. But over time, the story became a symbol, a case study in something psychologist Carl Jung would later call synchronicity. If you don't know, synchronicity is meaningful coincidences with no apparent causal connection. They're not random chances. It's not just probability, but they're more like moments that feel orchestrated. Was this just an incredibly rare coincidence? Some sort of 3-act joke that took the universe almost 3 decades to tell? Or was it something deeper? A hint that time, memory, and reality isn't as stable as we like to think. Some patterns feel like they're written in the stars, but others drop straight out of the sky, literally. Our next story is one of the most grounded and miraculous and purely human no-way moments I've ever come across. This is the true story of Joseph Figlock, a Detroit man who found himself in the middle of not one, but 2 freakishly identical accidents and changed the course of 2 lives just by being in the wrong place at the right time. Let's set the scene. It's the summer of 1937 in Detroit, Michigan. The country is clawing its way out of the Great Depression. Most people are focused on factory jobs, family survival, and staying cool in the sweltering Midwest heat. One of those people was Joseph Figlock, a municipal street sweeper. His job wasn't glamorous. He wasn't a firefighter or a soldier. He didn't carry a badge. He just had a broom, a pan, and a city-issued uniform. But on a random day in July, as Joseph swept an alleyway behind a low-rise apartment building on Adams Street, fate dropped something directly into his life. Literally. As Joseph walked below a second-story window, a baby fell out of it. A young child, reportedly 2 years old, had been playing near an open window when, without warning, they slipped, tumbled out, and fell toward the concrete below. And then, Joseph Figlock caught the baby. The child landed on his shoulders and chest, knocking Joseph to the ground. Both were indeed injured, minor bruises and some shock, but alive. Hospital records confirmed that if Joseph hadn't been standing there, the baby would not have made it. Newspapers at the time praised him as a quiet hero. The Detroit Free Press called it a freak accident with a miraculous ending. But the story doesn't end there, because this wasn't a one-time thing. Fast forward 1 year. It's now 1938. We're on the same street, under the same apartment building, working the same job. Joseph Figlock was sweeping the alley again, part of his daily routine, when another child, completely unrelated to the first, falls out of the same window. A different toddler from a different family, but the same outcome. Joseph was once again in the exact right spot, and once again caught the child, breaking the fall and saving their life. The Detroit police and local newspapers confirmed that both children survived, and Joseph himself suffered only minor injuries in both cases. If this were fiction, you'd probably throw the book across the room, because how does that happen? Well, let's break this down. The chances of a child falling from a window in a given year, while rare, are not zero. In fact, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission now tracks this sort of thing, and it estimates that between 5,000 and 8,000 children in the U.S. fall from windows annually. But how many of them land on someone? How many of them are caught mid-fall? That number is essentially statistical noise. It's not just unlikely, it's almost impossible to happen even once, much less twice, to the same man in the same location. And yet, here we are. Figlock's case had been cited in dozens of books, from Ripley's Believe It or Not, to Chronicles of Coincidence, to Strange But True. It's not just local legend. It's documented historical events. So what are we supposed to do with this? Is it just pure coincidence? A 1 in a trillion fluke that accidentally repeated itself? Or is there something more to it? Some theorists have tried to explain it as spatial probability. The idea that because Joseph passed by that alleyway every day, the odds of him being there during something like a fall weren't quite as cosmic as they may seem. Others go deeper, suggesting a synchronicity event in the Jungian sense. Two unrelated moments connected by a strange, invisible thread of meaning. A few lean into simulation theory, calling Figlock a kind of anchor point, or an anchor being if you're familiar with the Marvel MCU. An NPC in a system where certain scripts replay with eerie consistency. And then there are those who simply say, "It happened. That's all we know. And that's all we'll ever get." Not much is known about Figlock's personal life. He wasn't a celebrity. He didn't give any speeches. He didn't write a memoir or capitalize on his 15 minutes. All we know is that he kept his job as a city worker for several more years. According to reports, he was quiet, polite, and humble. The kind of guy you might pass on the street and never notice. But for two families in Detroit, he was unforgettable. Their kids are alive because of him. And not just because they called him a hero, but because he was just simply there, doing his work. Most of us will never have a moment like that. We'll live our whole lives without standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. But Joseph Figlock did. Twice. And while it's easy to laugh or chalk it up to luck, maybe there is something more to it. A nudge from the universe. A wrinkle in the code. A reminder that sometimes the world bends in ways that we simply can't predict. To save a life, or to whisper that something else is watching. You can explain one coincidence, maybe even two. But when the same man catches two falling babies, when two presidents mirror each other across an entire century, or when history quite literally ends where it began, you have to start to wonder, is it all just chaos and chance? Or is there a pattern hiding just under the surface? If you made it this far into the No Way files, thank you. Drop a comment and let me know which story is going to stick with you the longest. And hey, subscribe if you haven't already, because the next set of stories, they're even weirder. I'll see you then.